For anonymity, I'm going to leave out some details from this story that I'm sharing with all of you. All my wife wanted for her 31st birthday was to go on her favorite country artist's summer tour. The average ticket price for even mediocre seats seemed to be well over $200. That was surprising to me. I didn't go to very many concerts, but I thought it would be a lot cheaper than that. Anyway, I got a bit lucky. The tour was coming pretty close to her hometown, and I knew it would be the perfect gift for her. The tickets were going to be on sale on a Tuesday, and since I was working, I was going to get online and grab them after work. Well, again, my ignorance of the concert scene came into play soon, and the show sold out almost immediately. I saw that there was nothing available when I got home from work. I was texting one of my buddies, and he told me I could search on the secondary market for some seats. I would probably have to pay an upcharge, though. I was just excited there was still a chance. I began scrolling through the main sites, StubHub, Vivid Seats, all those others. After limited success, I switched gears, though, and began looking at Craigslist and Facebook groups and markets to see if I could find anything from a more local seller. I sent a few messages out, but hadn't really received any responses. The ones that did respond were increasing the price after every single message. It seemed like as the days and weeks rolled on, I should get ready to give up on my hopes. That was until I found someone selling 2 tickets for what seemed to be a very reasonable price. Their name was Victor, and he had the tickets listed on Facebook Marketplace. I messaged him in a real hurry, praying that they were still available. I didn't receive a response for the next half hour or so, and I'd assumed they were most likely already spoken for. I decided to get some sleep and went to bed pretty disappointed. When I got up for work the next morning, though, I had a message from Victor that he had sent at around 4 a.m. It said the tickets were still available if I really wanted them. I was ecstatic. I asked him when I could go grab them or meet him to pick them up. He replied and said he had a few other inquiries first, so I would need to send the payment via PayPal. Then we would schedule a time to meet up. He was okay with using PayPal goods and services, so I knew my money would at least be protected if he was trying to scam me. I quickly sent the payment and he confirmed it was received. He said he could send the tickets virtually or provide a physical copy if that was preferred. Since it was a gift, I asked if he could meet up for the physical copies. He said he had no problem with that. We had a plan to meet at a local grocery store at around 8 p.m. so I could grab the tickets from him. I showed up a little bit early and parked in the back left of the lot. As we'd agreed to, about 50 minutes later, an old Marin Oldsmobile pulled up and sat a few spaces away from my car. I wasn't sure if it was Victor or not, though, so I waited about 5 more minutes. The door to the other car opened, and I asked them, "Hey, are you Victor?" "Yeah, hi. Thank you. I really appreciate you buying these from me. Here are your tickets, sir." We small-talked for about a minute or so. I thanked him and said they were for my wife's birthday, and we both went our separate ways. I wrapped them up in a box for my wife and gave them to her for her birthday. She was so excited that we would be going to the concert just a few short weeks later. We get to the concert and everything was amazing. The seats had a really great view, and we grabbed some drinks as well. We were having a fantastic time. It was about 15 minutes into one of the opening acts when someone suddenly tapped me on my shoulder and said, "Hey, great to see you." I kid you not, it was Victor. "Oh, hey, what's going on?" "Sorry, I'm a little late. The traffic was pretty crazy." Victor reached across me and put his hand down to introduce himself to my wife. "I'm really glad you could make it." My wife, who was polite enough, didn't say anything to me immediately, but after saying hello and introducing herself, she pulled me aside and asked who this was. I thought it was the guy I'd bought tickets from. I didn't know he was going to be there, though. I thought he was just selling the tickets to us. Now, Victor seemed like a nice enough guy, and I had no problem sitting next to him for the entire show while my wife took the aisle seat. But some of his comments throughout the night were pretty confusing. It almost seemed like he thought we had made a plan to all go together, and that we were a group of friends hanging out or something. I was polite and tried to answer him every time he said something, but there were definitely a few times that I was weirded out. I just tried to enjoy the show and made sure my wife was having a good time more than anything. Anytime he would say something weird, like, "I'm really glad we got together," or give like a weird look, I would just give him a half smile and sort of nod. It became more and more clear that something was off with this Victor guy. My wife was having a blast though, and that's what was most important to me. As the concert grew to a close, Victor leaned over to both of us and whispered, "What's next? What do we got planned for the rest of the night, guys?" My wife looked at me confused. "Look, so, hey, I appreciate you selling us these tickets and all, but we're gonna head home and have a night to ourselves if that's alright with you." I got up and grabbed my jacket, as did my wife. We started to walk up the aisle when I felt something grab my arm. It was Victor. Before he could do anything, I said, "Hey, what's wrong with you, man? I don't even know you. Why don't you just leave us alone, alright?" At that moment, I was pretty angry, and after a night of appeasing a complete stranger's notions, I think my patience had grown a little bit thin. As we left, I felt bad though, and regretted yelling at him. It was pretty late, and my wife and I decided to grab some food on the way home and eat it on the couch before bed. The next few weeks went on as normal. My wife and I were both busy with work and had a ton of things to do around the house with any free time that we had. I remember going to bed early one night and trying to fall asleep when I got a Facebook alert on my phone. It was a message from Victor. "Hey, I had a nice time at the concert with you. I'm sorry if I overstepped, but I'd like to take a chance to get to know you better. Both of you." I deleted that message and blocked his account instantly. I was a bit weirded out. I don't really use social media all that much, and this was exactly why, because of weird people on the internet like Victor. His message really creeped me out, and it was on my mind a lot over the following days. Eventually, as all things do though, it began to fade slowly from my mind. About 6 or 7 weeks after the concert, my wife and I were sitting on the couch messing with our phones when our dog started going absolutely crazy. There was a loud pounding on the door outside. Outside of a few immediate family members, we never had anyone over to see us. I told my wife to stay where she was, and I would go through the garage to see who was there. I opened the garage and peered toward the front door, and my heart sank. I saw it was the weirdo from Facebook Marketplace, Victor. I was at a loss for words. I think I muttered something out like, "What the hell are you doing here?" I know, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have showed up unannounced, but I have some tickets for the next week's show. I thought you and your wife might want to go with me." He had this big smile on his face. I asked him how he knew where I lived. He said he'd found it from the PayPal transaction. I told him if he ever came to my house or my family again, I'd call the cops and let him meet my 200-pound dogs himself. He could hear them going crazy inside the house. His smile turned into a frown. "Oh yeah? We'll see." He walked away. I took a few moments outside to collect myself and went back inside to my wife. She asked me who that was, and I told her it was just a UPS. I told her I'd gotten a package. For the next few nights and even weeks later though, I felt something was really off. I noticed the motion lights going on much more frequently, and I felt like I heard scratching or creaking outside doors and windows. I chalked it up to the idea that I was just hypersensitive and hyper-focused on a weirdo showing up in my house. Thankfully, we haven't had any additional incidents or run-ins with Victor, but I know I'll never buy anything on Facebook ever again. I had a really bad fever once, so I woke up early to make a phone call to my doctor. It was around 8 a.m. or so. I knew they were closed because they opened at 9, but I decided to call the office anyway just in case. So the phone rings and goes on ringing, and finally goes on to the receptionist voicemail. I quickly hung up because I absolutely hate leaving voicemails. On top of being feverish, I'd also lost my voice pretty badly, so there was really no point in leaving a message anyway. After hanging up though, I kind of regretted not leaving a voicemail. I was kind of psyching myself out back and forth, and eventually I redialed the number. I didn't want to bother phoning 1 hour later, just in case I passed out on my bed or something. I thought I may as well leave a number at least for them to call me back. Let me tell you, trying to make an appointment with a family doctor can be a bit of a bitch sometimes. I go to dial and the phone rings again. I was waiting for the automated voicemail like before, but before I could go ahead and leave a message, to my surprise, someone actually picked up the phone. There was no introduction or asking of, "How can I help you?" It was super odd. There was just a very cold, "Hello?" I was left wondering why anyone had picked up, to be honest, since they didn't bother picking up the first time. "Hello? I would like to make an appointment to see Dr. Ma if I can." "Dr. Ma doesn't work here anymore." "What?" I looked at the number in my phone again, thinking maybe I dialed the wrong one. I went to apologize to her and said, "I'm so sorry." I hung up quickly after. It was 8 a.m. in the morning and I felt like complete shit. I then went and woke up my mom and told her to check the doctor's number to make sure. We'd had this family doctor for a long time, since birth even, so 20 years, and they'd never moved locations or anything. She pretty much yelled at me for waking her up to check a phone number that was correct. I couldn't sleep. I had goosebumps. At 9 o'clock, I called the number again. I was waiting, and another lady, much more cheerful sounding this time, picked up the phone. "Hello, this is Dr. Ma's office. How can I help you?" "Can I make an appointment with Dr. Ma?" I said, confused. "Absolutely. What time would you want to come in?" I was silent and scratching my head in confusion. As soon as possible. How's 11 a.m. sound?" "Oh, that's great." I went to my appointment and finally saw Dr. Ma. He was the same doctor I'd had for 20 years. After checking my tonsils, I told him what happened with my phone call earlier that morning. He went white in the face. His brow and eyes became serious in less than a second, and it became super quiet in the room. All he said to me the whole time was, "Did you call our old office?" Immediately after, he rushed me out the door, probably the quickest someone's ever kicked me out of the office before. When he showed me to the door, I asked him who that lady on the phone was earlier this morning. He didn't reply though. He only looked extremely upset and sent me on my way. Then I heard the door locking behind me. That was that. I really have no idea what happened that day. Last December, I was in Hyderabad, India with some friends for another friend's wedding. It actually has some cool things there, but it isn't exactly on the Indian tourist trail, if you know what I mean. Everywhere we went, we were basically the only white Western tourists there. We had a morning free and went to the center of town to see some of the sights. They sold this really cool pottery on the street in a part of the downtown area. We bought some small painted mugs for 200 rupees, or about $3. Yeah, we were getting ripped off a bit, but they were really nice, and we didn't really care. All of a sudden, this guy with a big mustache next to the pottery vendor started asking us a bunch of questions in broken English. All we could really understand him saying was something about a hotel. We told him no thank you. As we were walking to the palace, my friend, who is usually a chatty guy, went silent. I asked him what was wrong, and he told me the mustached man had been following us for almost a block on his moped. Worse still, he'd been talking to someone on the phone the entire time. We stopped and watched the man go past us, then pull a sudden U-turn and start following us again. Now, I've traveled a fair bit in the developing world, and at this point I assumed he was going to try and jump us or send his buddies after us to rob us later. We got to the gates of the palace just fine though, figuring we'd be safe there. We watched him pull in too. We rushed inside, and the mustached man still followed us in, even bought a 50 rupee ticket just like us, which, again, not cheap by Indian standards. He started following us around inside. At no point had he ever tried to talk to us again. As we were inside, he was maybe 20 or so paces back. We were still freaked out. We stopped in front of this magnificent building, and he appeared next to us. My friend asked him what the hell he wanted, but the man was completely silent and just stared at us. We went inside the building, and he was still walking directly behind us. I turned to confront him and told him we didn't want anything and to leave us alone. "You think I have bad feelings?" he said. I told him to fuck off. We went into another room and he continued to follow us, only now he was standing right on my neck, breathing silently. My friend raised his voice in anger, and people around started to notice. The mustached man then dashed off and disappeared. When we left the palace, our day was ruined by this creepy, silent, mustached man. We were freaked out that maybe he'd be waiting for us outside with his entourage. Thankfully, though, he was long gone. And the crazy thing is, at the wedding later that day, we told this story to our Indian friends, saying basically, "Oh, by the way, that thing where white guys get randomly followed around, that happened to us earlier today." Every single one of them replied to us that that's not a thing, and they'd never heard a story like that before. Who was that man, and what did he want? Was he following us because he thought we were just going to throw money at him? It was certainly very creepy. When I was about 11 or 12 years old, I went for a walk through our rural neighborhood with a group of friends. I was really feeling creeped out, like someone was staring at us for some reason. Since most of the area around us was woods, that made it even creepier. The boys, of course, all called me names and said I was being stupid, but I insisted the other girl and I go back home right now. We found out a bit later that a girl of similar age and build to us had been kidnapped from the county on one side of us, and her body had been left in the county on the other side. The police thought he might have been out looking for another victim as well. My front door has a window at just about head level. You can see straight into the living room through it, and I can see the window in my peripheral vision from the chair I sit in when watching TV or playing video games. One night I was watching a movie at around 2 a.m. when in my peripheral vision I noticed the window getting somewhat dim, like something was blocking the light from outside. I looked over to the window, only to see the silhouette of someone's head peeking inside. I froze and stared back at them until a few seconds passed. The person quickly fled, probably after noticing that I'd seen them. After that, I taped some paper bags against the window. It's a nice place I live in, somewhat new, but it's also in a crappy part of town. I'm almost positive that person had been scoping out my house to break in later. For a couple of days after, though, around the same time every night, someone would knock quickly and loudly on my front door window. I assume it was the same person. I'm thinking about getting a firearm to combat this. It was the weekend, and I'd just gotten out of my German course. I had my bag full of books with me. I stayed at the mall with my friends until about 2200 hours. At that moment, I knew I would have to catch the last bus going to my house, very far away from the mall. I left first to arrive on time, with my friends deciding to just stay there, because they all lived nearby. I got to the bus station shortly after, and it was already quite dark out. I, a 14-year-old boy, was now stuck alone at the station, very close to a nearby park. After a few minutes, I noticed a guy with a black hat on and a big black coat, with a slightly disfigured face appearing out of nowhere. He stood 2 feet away from me and just stared dead into my eyes. I could tell immediately something was not right with this 30-year-old stranger looking into my eyes. After 1 minute of silence full of adrenaline, he asked me if I knew what time it was. I didn't get my phone out or anything. I just told him my approximate guess. He leaned in even closer to me and whispered to me with a sadistic smile on his face. "You know, a few days ago, I saw this guy my age sucking a boy's seed, and the boy looked just like you." He then waited smiling for my response to this. I took my hand to my little knife I had in my jacket, a knife I usually used only for cutting paper. I could hear my heart beating in my head. I didn't even dare to blink while watching him. Do you not find that interesting? A man giving a blowjob to a teenager your age for free? I calmly responded that I did not find such a thing intriguing. I grabbed my phone out and called one of my friends from the mall. I pretended to talk to him while saying that he needed to come to the station shortly, telling him I needed him right away. The very moment I mentioned that someone was waiting for me, the man quickly disappeared into the park nearby, while my friend reminded me I'd left my bag at the mall. He was very confused as to why I was so scared. I ran back over to the mall and told my friends what just happened. They decided that this time they would all come with me to the bus. Right as we stepped out of the building, though, we noticed the exact same guy hiding from us in a corner, staring at me. I screamed out, "That's the guy!" He then started running from us, while 3 of my older friends started chasing him. I went to the station with the rest of my friends, where they waited with me until I got on and arrived home. One of my older friends called to tell me that the guy had disappeared around a corner and they couldn't find him after. I still get the chills telling this story, even 3 years later. My friends and I went to a house party, being thrown by a girl who was leaving town and trying to raise money for her last month's bills and moving costs. It was a pretty good time, aside from keeping my then girlfriend from trying to start a fight with the girl who was moving. We didn't really know anyone there though, beside the girl who was hosting the party. I was the designated driver of the group, so I kept checking in with my friends to see if everybody wanted to stay. One of my friends looked like he was feeling very ill, and he told me that he suddenly had these body-racking chills. The party was in the early summer, so it was still quite warm out. I asked him if he wanted some aspirin, or if he needed to go to the hospital. He said he just felt like we had to get out of there right now. I gathered up him and all my other friends, and we left soon after. I drove us down to a diner, and on the ride there, my friend's chills started to subside. He couldn't really explain it, other than a weird feeling that we needed to leave, that subsided as soon as we had gone far enough. It turns out that about 45 minutes after we'd left the party, a fight had started, which ended up with multiple people being stabbed to death. We found out on the following Monday. This story happened a while ago, but it still messes with my mind. As a side note, I live in a quiet countryside where usually nothing ever happens. I'm an 18-year-old girl who can easily walk around my hometown alone without being scared at all. It's really safe here. So as usual, me and my dog went for a walk one evening. There was nice weather outside, so I decided to go to a nearby field. I usually let my dog off her leash there, so it was a lot of fun for both of us. She's a nice, obedient dog and always comes when I call for her. We get to the field and everything is going really well. Nothing seemed off at all, except I got this kind of odd feeling in my gut that I never usually had. The last time I'd felt this feeling was when I was 8 years old and we were driving at night with my family. I remember telling them, "Something is wrong, you should be careful." They slowed down because I was so serious at that moment, and a minute after I said it, a deer came out of nowhere. It would have crashed right into us if we had been going the same speed as a minute before. We were all shocked, and I remember it like it was yesterday. In this field 10 years later, I got that very same gut feeling. Whatever, I thought. I kept going, completely ignoring it. We rolled around the fields and nearby forest until the sunset started to arrive. I put my dog back on her leash and decided to leave on one of the tiny paths going through a small forest. It was the fastest way to get to my home. It was not a popular way to go, but it was much quicker. As I was walking along that path, I suddenly spotted a silhouette at the end of the road, just before the forested area started. I didn't really take that much note at that point, and kept walking. After a while, though, I had a strong gut feeling, and stared at the silhouette a bit closer. That was when I noticed that the silhouette was staring at me too, not moving. I was just thinking that maybe they were waiting for someone, because at first the silhouette almost looked like a child's. As I got closer though, I noticed it was not a child at all. It was a grown man sitting down on a child's bicycle. It was a blue-green boy's bike. His legs were way too big for it, and his whole body looked like he was forcing himself to ride it. It was a genuinely unsettling sight. Still, my dumbass didn't want to turn around and have a couple kilometers of wasted time. Even though this was really creepy, I still thought maybe he's waiting for someone that usually comes this way. Every step I took, though, I could see his eyes following me with an intense expression. I was only 20 meters away from him when he started to do these weird wheelies on his bike, smiling the ugliest and most unsettling smile I've ever seen. His eyes were almost popping out of his head. It looked like he was really expecting something. The man was clearly in his 50s, very long, thin legs and arms, bald with his unsettling smile. The alarm bells really started to ring now. I glanced behind me and noticed no one was there. It was just me, an 18-year-old small girl, and her fluffy, definitely not guard dog. I turned around right away and started to jog back where I'd come from. I glanced back at him and sighed in relief when I noticed he was not following me or anything. Maybe he really hadn't been waiting for me after all. I called myself stupid and a scaredy cat. I was so wrong, though. My adrenaline started to slow down. I was in the middle of the fields and I still could see no sign of him attempting to follow me. I let my dog off her leash again and she started to run around. I was nearly at the end of the field when my dog spotted a rabbit or deer or some interesting thing and flew towards it. I panicked because she had never done that before. I yelled out for her. I yelled plenty of times for her to come back right now. I'm relieved nothing happened to her, but as I put her back on her leash, I noticed something out of the corner of my eye. The freaky bald longlegs was biking towards me, not even looking at the ground as he biked forward, but instead at me. Freak out wasn't enough to express my feeling in that moment. I don't know how to describe this, but I've never seen a human being who looked so crazy. More than crazy even. What surprised me the most was how effortlessly he was biking through this field. I can tell you it's not an easy field to even walk in sometimes. It has muddy ponds you need to jump over, but that psycho was just biking right through them. I didn't want to watch another second behind me. I just started running. I ran so fast that I saw black from my asthma and nearly collapsed. My lungs hurt so bad, I thought I was going to die. I glanced back behind me, and he was still right there, keeping up his full speed on the field grounds with that ugly white smile and that way too small for him bike. After that, I ran like crazy until I found a random house and hid in their yard. I didn't even mind that I was on someone else's property. It didn't matter to me in that moment at all. I waited for a while, with my breath stuck in my throat, but the man didn't come. At some point, the adrenaline started leaving my system, and I left my hiding spot. I ran again until I reached an area with multiple people out in their yards, so I would have help if I saw him again. Of course, I didn't though. I typed 911 into my phone, but I couldn't bring myself to call, mostly because I didn't have any proof, and I didn't want my parents to find out. They were way too overprotective, so they probably wouldn't even let me leave the house anymore. I've been paranoid after this incident. My dog was frightened too. I guess she noticed something was really off about this guy. I swear to God that I will always listen to my gut when it's telling me something from now on. I'm still scared of that man. I keep expecting to randomly spot him in some area. I always think about what he could have done to me. I can't forget his awful smile. It feels like he's gonna jump in through my window one night and do whatever he wants to me. Almost exactly a year ago, I had one of the worst experiences of my entire life. My friend Shane decided to have a cookout since a lot of our friends had just graduated from college, and we were all home for the summer. The afternoon started exactly how you would expect a summer cookout to go. We grilled some burgers, drank some beers, and enjoyed a beautiful summer day. One of the great things about Shane's place was that it was seemingly in the middle of nowhere and located right on the lake as well. If you knew Shane, you would understand how out of character this was for him. Shane was very much a city man. He grew up in the city, spent all of his time in the city, even went to college in the city. Being outside, boating, and fishing are things I never thought I would associate with him. But here we are. He ended up getting a job after college and received a massive sign-on bonus. He works from home 90% of the time, so he spent the majority of that bonus time out on a boat, even though he had never driven a boat in his life before. The afternoon of the cookout, everybody was begging Shane to take the boat out, and he was refusing. I think the main reason he refused was that there were a lot of people at the house, and he didn't want to leave them all unattended. Honestly though, I also don't think he knew how to operate the boat that well, and that's why he didn't want to take it out either. As the afternoon progressed and people started leaving, eventually there were only 7 of us left. The girl he liked at the time started to beg him again to take the boat out, and before we knew it, all of us were chanting and begging him to take it out as well. Finally, he gave in to the peer pressure. I knew right away though this was a bad idea. He was struggling badly to get the boat untied from the dock, and once it was untied, it was a 15-minute struggle to get it moving into the lake. It was clear to me that Shane had most likely never done this before, at least not on his own. It was around 5 in the afternoon at this point, so there was still light outside. We probably had a good 3 hours of light left. I figured we would take the boat around the lake a little bit, not move too far away from the shore, and be back well before it got dark outside. Well, it was apparent that not everyone on the boat shared my concerns. Everyone except for me was pushing Shane to go further and further. Turn down this channel, go over here. Before we knew it, we had traveled far away from Shane's house. It was starting to get real dark out too. I could tell that Shane was nervous. I asked if he knew where we were, and he just shrugged quietly. Around 8:30, it was nearly completely dark out, and everyone on the boat was getting quite cranky. Tempers had started to rise. Shane had no clue where we were, and he had no idea how to get back either. He started yelling at everyone, telling us it was our fault for making him go out there in the first place. He was half right, of course, but some of the blame was on him, since he was the one who gave in to the pressure. Around 9, not only were we just drifting out on the pitch-black lake, but it had also started to rain lightly. That caused the temperature to drop quite a bit, so we all huddled up under the little canopy on his boat. I said I was going to call the authorities so they could send someone out to help us. Shane didn't like this idea one bit though. He said that we can't call. This is when he finally admitted to us that he didn't even have a license to operate the boat, and the boat wasn't insured either. That meant if the police came out to help us, he would be getting a hefty number of fines. So instead of getting help, we just kept drifting and drifting. At this point, nothing was really scary though. It was more annoying. I mean, sure, the darkness of night on the water is eerie, but being cold, wet, and angry trumped any feelings of fear I may have had. At nearly 10 o'clock, Shane exclaimed that he finally knew where we were and that he would get us back right away. He said we were almost at his place already. A few minutes passed and we started making our way close to the shore. Just as we were preparing to dock, Shane said in a sort of depressed voice, "Oh no." I looked up and realized the reason why. There was no dock to be found, and no house in sight either. Wherever this was we had landed, it was not where Shane lived. I finally had the genius idea to check the GPS. I don't know why it hadn't dawned on me until now. I blame it on all the drinking, and the fact I've never been on boats or used GPS on a boat before. It took a second to find service, but when I finally did, I finally realized we were in the nightmare situation. Not only were we nowhere near Shane's house, but we were truly out in the middle of nowhere. The shoreline next to us was nothing more than a small island, and the next shoreline seemed very far off. After some panicking and yelling, of course, we all calmed down and agreed to work together to get back to the mainland. The idea was that once we got to shore, we could just use the GPS map to follow the shore all the way back down to Shane's place. It took a little while, but we eventually did get back to the shore. We started to slowly track our way back. About 10 minutes through, though, we saw a light coming right at us on the horizon of the lake. It was another boat. We figured that we could ask them for help and make sure that we were on the right track. Shane got the other boat's attention. The man that pulled up was quite creepy. It was an older man, very rough-looking. I could smell fish even from where I was sitting down. The guy was clearly some sort of fisherman and told us we weren't far off. He would guide us back so we didn't get lost. We were quite relieved and started following this fisherman. I started to question him a little though, since the GPS said we were going in the opposite direction. Shane said not to worry though, and to trust the fisherman since he probably knew some shortcuts or something. At around 11:30, the fisherman docked his boat on this rickety dock in the middle of nowhere and asked us how our fuel was doing. Shane admitted that he was nearly out. The fisherman said he would fill us up, but he needed help getting the fuel since he'd hurt his back and couldn't lift the containers himself. Me, Shane, and the two other guys got out and started walking with the fisherman. The girls stayed in the boat. They seemed kind of freaked out, which I couldn't exactly blame them for. Something didn't feel right about all this. I didn't know anything about boats though, so I didn't know if this was proper etiquette or what. We walked around 100 feet from the boat, and there was this tiny shack, but no house at all. In fact, there was nothing in the area except for trees and this one shack. The man said the containers were just inside the door, but the door was heavy. He asked if one of us could get the door and open it. Shane started to open the door, but when it was finally opened, there was nothing inside. We turned around, only to see the man running towards Shane's boat without saying anything. He jumped into the boat and turned it on. We could hear the girls screaming and feared the worst. Thankfully, he didn't get very far though. Shane and I dove into the water and swam to the side of the boat as the man was beginning to leave. Shane managed to jump on, which alerted the man to our presence. Once he saw us, he dove off into the lake and swam back to the shore. We lost him in the darkness. Seconds later, we picked up our two friends on the rickety dock, and I called the police with the little service that we had. I didn't really care what Shane had said anymore. Thank God they showed up soon enough and realized that we were about an hour away from Shane's house. Believe it or not, they actually found this guy's fisherman boat. I learned that apparently that boat had been stolen. Shane, of course, got into trouble for not having his boat legals and still gives me crap about calling the police to this day, even though some deranged stranger almost stole his boat with all our friends inside it. Obviously, I don't really talk to Shane anymore. Since that night, he blames me for everything that happened. As far as I know, they never caught the random dude, so I have no idea what his plan was at all. All I know is that this was one of the worst nights of my life, and it could have been a whole lot worse if we hadn't managed to catch him before he left the dock. The story I'm about to tell you is a lesson for you to choose your friends carefully, because sometimes the people you think are your friends are the very monsters you're afraid of. I know that sounds a bit cliche right off the start, but honestly, it's true. I'm still in awe of how certain individuals can act. A little more than a year ago, I moved to a new town. I'm a city girl by heart, but I was happy to start a new life in this town. I don't want to say exactly what town it is, but it's a fraction of the size of the place I grew up in. I spent the first few months just kinda keeping to myself and learning the day-to-day operation, how it works at my new job. On weekends, I would just sort of listen around and see what everyone was up to. A couple of weeks into the job, I finally got invited out by one of the girls I worked with. I'll be honest, this was a lot like high school. This was the girl I wanted to hang out with. She was the popular girl at the job, and all the guys liked her. The girls all wanted to hang out with her too. Yes, we were adults, and this mindset still applied. We went to some local bar that Friday night after work. I wasn't drinking much, since I didn't want to make a fool of myself with my potential new friends. It didn't take long, though, for me to realize exactly the kind of person she was. For the purposes of this story, I'll refer to her as Marissa. She was getting that wild level of intoxicated, and it was really uncomfortable to watch. I just laughed along and hoped the night would end soon. I made sure all the girls got an Uber home, and finally headed off myself at around 2 in the morning. I was completely exhausted that night. Clearly, I'd underestimated these girls. When I woke up in the morning, I had forgotten about a lot of the nonsense from the night before. I just remembered most of the good times. I was happy to have new friends and not be all alone out here. That thought alone blinded me from the reality of who Marissa really was. The next night, we all hung out again, and that night was a copy of the previous night. Nothing noteworthy other than Marissa being completely out of control again. Marissa was constantly saying how she couldn't wait to get out again this weekend, all week every time at work. She also said she loved hanging out with me. I was actually flattered and was ready to do this again the upcoming Friday. It came, and this time she was beyond intoxicated. She had even become mean to her friends and the other girls we worked with. They all left after saying so many words I don't want to repeat. Before I knew it, it was just me and Marissa left. We were at the bar and she was barely coherent. I got her home and stayed on her couch to make sure she'd be alright. When I woke up in the morning, she was already awake and cleaning out her kitchen. She thanked me for the previous night and invited me to party later in the evening. I knew I didn't have any plans, so of course I accepted her invitation. She told me to pick her up at around 10 that night and that she would direct me to the party area. She had me excited about this before we even left the house. She told me it was going to be a real epic time at her friend's barn, a massive bonfire with food, drinks, dancing, and much better company than we could have at the local bar. I was so excited that I was basically singing in the car. Well, that excitement started to dwindle, and I realized how long we'd be driving. It was after 11, and we still weren't there yet. If I knew I was going to have to drive more than an hour to some party, I would have declined earlier in the day. Marissa was so pumped up though, and I really wanted her to like me. She finally had me pull over at this sketchy area. The only word I can think to describe the situation there was suspicious. There was nothing inside at all. No streetlights, no signs, no houses, most notably no signs of a party. I asked her what was going on. She only told me, "You're gonna love this." It was so dark when we pulled up, I didn't even realize there was a small barn on the side of the road. I could see the beams from a small flashlight shining out through the doors. Marissa told me the party was over there, and we needed to hurry up. That made no sense though. Why would we need to hurry up? It's not like it was going to end anytime soon. While we were briskly walking over towards this barn, I noticed that Marissa was wearing jeans, and the person who was waving the flashlight seemed to be dressed in all black, yet here I was wearing some cute dress. I had my full makeup on too. We were almost at the barn door when I noticed Marissa seemed to be falling back a bit. She was walking about a foot behind me. For some reason, the guy with the light opened the door, and inside, I still can't believe what I saw. It was one of Marissa's friends from the bar, one of the ones that had said some not-so-nice things to her. She was sitting unconscious in a chair. I freaked out and demanded to know what was going on. Marissa replied, "She disrespected me, and now she's gonna pay for it." I was stunned by the completely unhinged nature of her. I knew at this point she was a wild party girl, but I didn't think she was capable of whatever this was. I didn't want to know why I was there, and I didn't give her the option to tell me either. Thinking as quickly as I could, I kicked some dirt in the guy's face who was holding the light and grabbed the unconscious girl. I wasn't really worried about Marissa stopping me because I was nearly double her size. I hoisted the girl up and ran back to my car. I basically dumped her in the back seat and sped off. While I was driving, I was fortunate enough to get some cell service, and even though, like I said, there was nothing anywhere near close to us, I was able to call the police and told them I had an unconscious woman in my back seat. I told them about Marissa as well, and the guy that she was with. Thankfully, not too long into the drive, the girl started to move and groan, then started to talk. I pulled over and explained what happened, and she started crying. She told me that the guy was some guy she had been dating for a while. He said he was taking her to a party at a barn, only when she got there, Marissa was already there and smacked her across the face with some sort of heavy object. Whatever it was had knocked her out cold. We finally linked up with the cops, and Marissa's former friend was taken to the hospital and treated for a minor concussion. Thankfully, that was all the damage that was done. Later that evening, they found Marissa at her house, and she was completely surprised as to why she was getting arrested. She claimed to have done nothing wrong, and that the events that transpired that night were all just a prank. They never did catch the guy, since he had been using a fake name and fake cell phone number. Marissa refused to turn him in. From what I understand, she still claims it was just some sort of prank. Now she's locked up though. I can't remember exactly what they charged her with, but I know she got in trouble for assaulting her with a weapon and kidnapping. Obviously, her future's not looking too bright at this moment. It was truly insane to be a part of, and I hope at least one person can learn from my mistakes. This story takes place about 5 days ago, and I'm still shaken up over it. I'm a 19-year-old female. My parents and I packed up our U-Haul and made the long drive to our new home up north from our small and dinky apartment in Central Florida. I can't lie, I was very excited about this move. Attending college in the spring, finally getting to start my dream career, and so many other things I couldn't or didn't get to do in Florida were now available to me. On the first night of our drive, we stopped at a hotel in what appeared to be a shady area. It was kind of scary, as it was set up right outside a closed-down gas station with boards and graffiti all over the place. From my parents' experience and what I'd seen on TV, these aren't the types of places you want to go lurking around in. My dad, who's usually very calm and collected, was on edge the whole night since the door to our room didn't close all the way. We had to prop one of the hotel chairs against it and use the deadbolt to have even the slightest bit of comfort. I thought it couldn't get much worse than that, but I was so wrong. The second night, we stopped in a small town in North Carolina. We had our 2 cats with us, so we had to find a hotel that was pet-friendly. We came across one of those hotels and booked a room for the night. While my parents were busy making sure nothing had shifted in the U-Haul, I was in the passenger seat of my mom's car with my little buddy, trying to calm him down. He seemed a lot more agitated than usual. About a half an hour after pulling into the parking lot, we grabbed the cats and our essentials. Emotions were running high, so we were all on edge about getting to our new home in the next day or two, depending on the amount of sleep we got. We loaded our things into a cart and approached the hotel's side door. My mom pulled out the key card, and it took a while for the door to finally unlock. The second we heard it click, though, a woman started yelling at us. We all looked up and saw a random woman frantically running towards us. Her voice was in a complete panic. It still sends shivers down my spine every time I think about it. She was wearing a long dark blue jacket, and her hair was in a messy ponytail that was tucked inside. She looked really tired, like she hadn't slept in a year or had just gone through something horrible. She was screaming, muttering the words, "Call 911, there's something wrong with my baby." There was no child with her, nor did we see any kids in sight. My initial thought was that maybe there was a kid near the front of the building, and there was a car accident or something. The woman kept telling us to call 911, but my mom told her we didn't have a phone on us. I always carry mine on me though, and so being the kind-hearted person I try to be, I offered to call for her. The moment I pulled out my phone, my dad snatched it out of my hand. "It's really, really bad. You need to come and see." My mom told her she didn't want to see, and that we should go inside so the lady could go to the front desk and get some help. At first, she was screaming, No, I don't need their help. I need your help." But my mom kept insisting we go inside. At this point, my little buddy was whining and clawing at his pet carrier, trying to get out and attack this lady. The lady took one look at him and attempted to reach for him. Yeah, let's get the babies inside." The way she said it was so creepy. This time, she sounded like she was on drugs or had bad intentions. I scooped up my cat before she could touch him, and we led her to the front desk, where she told the hotel worker the same story as us. The worker tried to calm her down, and while the lady was distracted, my parents and I walked toward the elevator and got inside. As I looked back at the lobby, I saw the woman now staring at us, her eyes full of anger. She then started charging right at us. Before I even had the chance to react, my mom pushed me and the cat into the elevator, them standing in front to protect me. I could still see the woman charging towards us even as the elevator doors closed. I remembered the small screen near the elevator in the lobby, showing which floor the elevator was headed to, so to stop this crazy lady from harassing us all night, we pressed every single button and stopped on every floor. First the second, the third, the fourth, then the fifth. After the fifth floor, we pressed the button back to our original floor and quickly piled into the room. There was silence outside. My heart was pounding the entire time. My body started shaking at what just happened. As I got my cat out of the carrier, I heard my mom and dad talking about the lady. My dad speculated that maybe she had a mental illness or was on drugs. My mom said she could have been a trafficker with the way she was trying to get us to come with her and see this supposed situation. My heart really broke. I try so hard to see the good in people, but at the same time, I try to keep my distance the best I can. This was the first time someone ever approached me for help, and I was so gullible I believed her story right away. I tried to hold back my guilt as best I could, but I ended up breaking down. My mom hugged me, saying everything was going to be okay, but no matter how many times she and dad kept saying that, I kept shaking, and my paranoia lasted throughout the night. Even at the slightest creak, I shot up from the bed and looked out the peephole, thinking the lady must have somehow found us. Luckily, she wasn't there. That night, we all decided we were going to get up around sunrise and reach our new home before nightfall. No more hotel stops, no more creepy people, and no more shady areas. As we checked out the next morning, the same employee from the last night was there. We asked her what happened after we got into the elevator. The worker told us that after that, the crazy lady left in a huff, her hands clenched into fists. Then the worker revealed a detail that my mind keeps going back to. When she turned to go after us, she saw a syringe in the crazy lady's jean pocket. I don't know if she'd already used it or was planning to use it on me and my family. It makes me wonder what the outcome would have been had my parents not been there. What if I had given the lady my phone instead of offering to call for her? Would she have robbed us while we were injected with whatever she was on? Anyway, we made it to our new home 2 days ago, but the fear of that night still eats away at me. It goes to show that no matter how panicked or frightened someone may sound or act, you truly don't know if they're in genuine trouble or have bad intentions. Please be careful out there, guys. I unfortunately had to learn the hard way that not everyone in this world is a good person. I was visiting a friend in California, and due to his living situation, I had to stay at a motel for a few days. The second day, I was at the motel with my friend checking out the pool, etc. We ran into a girl about our age and struck up a conversation. We decided to see if she wanted to hang out, or perhaps if she had any friends with her. I invited her back to my room, and the three of us went up. As soon as she got inside, though, she started acting very strange and asking me about my mother. She started telling me that I should call my mother that day and tell her how much I loved her. I kinda brushed it off and thought it was weird, but she kept on pushing the issue, basically commanding me to call my mother that very second and tell her how I felt. She then said she was going to run up to her room real quick and be right back. As soon as she left, though, I told my friend I was really freaked out and that we needed to get out of here right now. I wasn't sure she was going to do anything to us, try to rob us or whatnot. Or maybe she was going to come back with her posse, but I knew something bad was going to happen. My friend thought I was overreacting, but agreed to leave. As we were pulling out, we saw her coming back down by herself with a knife in hand. We just kept driving. I still had to sleep there that night though, and needless to say, I was scared completely shitless. The next day, I checked out ASAP and stayed at a nice hotel for 2 times the price instead. It was well worth it. To this day, I don't know if I dodged a bullet or not, but I know that something bad was going to happen, and I didn't want to risk it. When I was 12 years old, riding my bike home from school, which was about a half-mile trip, a van suddenly pulled up next to me, and the driver knew me by name. I vaguely recognized the man as one of my down-the-street neighbors. Our neighborhood was pretty kid-friendly, and that there were dozens of us around, and we would play throughout the streets with each other, or in people's yards without issue. His was one that happened to be commonly played in, but he and his wife had moved out a couple of years prior. Anyway, he was just talking to me, asking me how my family was, and saying how much he and his wife missed all the kids playing in their yard ever since they'd moved away. It was innocent enough, but then he became very insistent that he give me a ride home. I told him it was fine, and I had my bike with me. Besides, at this point, I was literally only 2 blocks away from home. He kept on insisting though, even getting out of his van to open the back doors and invite me in. At this point, my something is wrong dar was going off loud and clear to ignore this man and get the fuck out of there. After telling my brother, who was 6 years older, about it, He confessed that all the kids in the neighborhood stayed away from that couple before because they'd all had similar, if not more intense experiences with both him and his wife. I truly believe I dodged a bullet that day. I live in a small town where the school has roughly 150 kids. Keep in mind that's for kindergarten through 12th grade. If that doesn't tell you how small my town is, nothing will. Of course, every small town has its own haunted house, and that house happened to be mine. My mom always claimed that our house was haunted. She claimed to see shadows, hear voices, and footsteps in the hallway. I was always a skeptical kid anyway, though. I was about 12 at the time. I was home alone waiting for my mom one night. She was to come home and take me to a church activity. It was around 7 o'clock at night, and I was sitting on my couch with my dog at my feet. Most likely he was sleeping. I had always been afraid of ghost movies and such, but that night made my fear of the paranormal that much worse. The whole house seemed to be alive. The floors were randomly squeaking, the walls were cracking, and there was a terrible wind outside. I was terrified. I tried my best to just pay attention to what was on the television, but all I could hear was my scared breathing. Suddenly, all at once, the squeaking and moaning stopped. It was dead silence. Out of that silence, though, I began to hear obvious heavy footsteps coming from the hallway behind me. My sleeping dog instantly shot up and started barking and running around the house. Being a scared little 12-year-old, I curled up into a ball on the couch and screamed to go away. Just like that, the footsteps stopped. Everything stopped. It was silence once again. Since then, I've never stayed home alone. I've been too scared to. Before I start my story, I'd like to say that I'm about 6 foot 3 inches tall. This took place during the middle of summer in 2015. I had recently landed a position in field sales, and I couldn't be more happy with it. The money was great, and the company I worked for even gave me a company vehicle. The only downside to the job was that my sales territory was quite expansive. That could mean me driving across several states sometimes. The people I worked for expected me to drive to most of my customers. I was grateful, however, since not that many people my age get these sorts of opportunities. After a couple of weeks of getting the hang of things, I got a business call from a clinic in northwestern Florida. They wanted me to come and provide a demonstration of our product. I told them that I'd be there by noon the next day. This drive would take me straight down the middle of Alabama on Interstate 65, then bring me through Alabama State Route 113 down to Florida. I planned to get there by around 11 p.m. or so. The night before, once I got past Montgomery, it was almost 9:30, so it was already dark out. I have some experience with driving long distances during the night. Because of that, the fact that it was nighttime didn't really bother me. Once I saw the exit sign, I took the exit. I had just noticed it was already 10 p.m., so I stopped at a gas station and bought myself an energy drink so I could still arrive at my destination on time. Once I'd gotten back on the road, I realized this drive was going to bring me right through the middle of nowhere. After about 25 minutes of driving past nothing but farms, fields, and small towns, I arrived at another small town and stopped at a McDonald's to stretch my legs. Once I got back onto the road and headed south, I noticed a sign. The sign read, "Farm Machinery and Deer Crossing." Crap, another long route through the middle of nowhere. After about 10 minutes or so, I noticed my car was running low on gas as well. After a couple minutes, I was just praying I wouldn't be stuck out there on the country highway in the middle of the night. It didn't look like I was going to be finding a gas station anytime soon. As I was driving down the country highway, I tried to use as little gas as possible. Just when it seemed my car was about to completely run out, I did see a small gas station, barely a quarter-mile away. I pulled up, only to notice immediately that this gas station was completely run down and there were no cars at all around it. Just when I started to think this place wasn't open, I found out where the fill-up tanks were. Once the car was filled up, I was looking down at my phone when I heard a sudden but barely noticeable sound on the top of the gas station roof. I looked up, being really quiet to try and hear that sound again, but I couldn't hear anything. Everything was silent. Thinking it was probably nothing, and I was probably tired from driving so long, I decided to stop driving for the night and sleep in my car. I looked at my phone for a bit, then fell asleep. I was out for a good hour or so when I was woken up to the same noise again, coming from the same area it seemed. This time I got outside my car though, to investigate. That was a big mistake. I went to the road so I could see the roof better, and when my eyes adjusted, I saw a huge man crouched up on the roof. "Hey, what are you doing up there?" I called out. They suddenly stood up and locked eyes with me. They let out this huge ear-piercing screech, which I remember clearly to this day. The next thing I knew, I remember them jumping down. I was amazed at how tall they were. Based on how tall I am, they seemed to be even bigger than me. They ran almost inhumanly fast off into the woods. I knew after seeing this I might as well be seeing skunk ape or something. I ran as fast as I could back to the car and got out of there as soon as possible. My heart was beating so fast it could have popped out of my chest at any moment. God knows what that guy could have done to me if I was still sleeping. Once I got to the nearest town, I got a hotel room and tried to calm myself down. I stayed awake all night, then drove down to where I needed to be. A couple of months after my encounter, I remember watching this TV show. I remember this part about a guy that matched that description of what I saw that night. Honestly, I still have nightmares about what I saw. That experience has made me scared of driving through country highways at night, and whenever I go to a gas station after it's gotten dark, I always make sure there are at least 1 or 2 cars there already. I had recently been on vacation in South Dakota with my family and 2 others. In my family, there was my mom, my dad, and my sisters. In my family, there was my mom, my dad, my sister who's referred to as Julia, my other sister Gretchen, and myself. I was 15, Julia was 12, and Gretchen was 10. In the second family, there were 4 people, the parents and their 2 daughters. The last family was made up of 2 parents and their 3 kids as well. I woke up on one of the last days of the trip and went outside to sit down on the porch of the camper cabin. My parents were up, along with Chet, Carl, and Julia. The adults were at the picnic table, talking about whatever outdoorsy people talked about. I was more of an indoors person though, and I had no interest in joining their conversation. I was on the outside because Gretchen was not a morning person. Julia ran over to me and said she had to show me something. She brought me only a few feet away from where I'd been sitting and pointed down at the ground. What I saw made me immediately queasy. There was a leg covered in furry skin that was slowly rotting away. You could see the bones poking out of it. Julia thought it was a pronghorn leg, but I thought it was from a coyote. We told our mom, and she said that Nathan and Calvin had brought it over after finding it in the woods near their cabins. Needless to say, I was horrified. The next day, we went to Bear Country, USA, which not only has bears but several other animals as well. One of the enclosures was a coyote. Remembering that terrifying leg, I looked at the live coyote's legs. I was right. It seemed the leg had been the back leg of a coyote. My stomach churned. Whatever had killed that coyote had severed its leg. It was big and obviously a carnivore. There must have been only one creature in the park that fit that description, either a bear or a mountain lion. The thing was, Nathan and Calvin weren't allowed to wander more than 80 feet away from the cabins. This mountain lion or bear must have been right next to where we were staying. Us kids often played outside in the dark. I was the oldest and tallest, and I was only 5 feet tall. I was skinny and weak, just like the others. That bear or whatever it was could have easily taken all of us down. It scares me so much to this day to think that leg could have been one of ours. It's so horrifying I can't even bring myself to imagine that ever being the case. What makes small towns so small sometimes is how much nature surrounds them, and this time the nature was much too close for comfort. Walking the dog with my girlfriend one time in a really brushy/grassy area. There was only one dirt path, and the grass was taller than us on either side. I started getting this strange feeling, like we were being watched or something. I just couldn't relax. I was constantly looking behind us and around the hills for anything. We stopped at a bench that backed up to some very tall brush, and my girlfriend pulled out her pipe to smoke. I couldn't bring myself to do it though. I was too anxious. Something was watching us. I could feel it. I stood on the bench she was sitting on and looked out into the brush to see if I could find it. Both my dog and my girlfriend, though, were completely chill, like nothing was even wrong. I didn't notice it at the time, but I realized after I heard the sound of cubs crying somewhere nearby. Finally, I urged my girlfriend it was time to leave right now. On our way out, which there was only one way out, I got to the crest of one of the winding turns. When I saw a gigantic cat with pointy black ears and huge black paws trotting away from us around the bend. I only saw it for a second, then it was gone. I was the only one to see it too. It's about now that I put 2 and 2 together. Those were her cubs crying that we'd heard. What do you know? It was also getting to be about dusk time. This was not a good situation. The worst part was having to exit the exact same way I'd just seen that cougar go. I never knew if it was trying to leap out and take us away or what. We never saw it after that again, thankfully, and we never went there near dusk again. When I was 13, I was almost kidnapped. I live in a somewhat sketchy neighborhood. I used to walk home to a residential area, and at the end of the street was a dead end. I would have to climb a bunch of stairs, surrounded by trees to get to a walkway behind my building. This one week, our principal notified us that a few girls had been desperately harassed by a group of men, and the police were also searching for a known sex offender who had a warrant out for his arrest. I'm a guy, so at the time, I really didn't give it that much thought. This one afternoon, though, I was taking my usual route when I noticed an abnormal white work van. You know, the ones child abductors use to kidnap kids in movies. It was driving right behind me. The van slowed down to roughly the same speed I was walking at. I kept turning my head to see where this van was every few seconds when I see it started driving on the sidewalk behind me. This is where things got really creepy. I began to walk very fast, pretty much a light jog almost. The van picked up speed behind me and was getting closer and closer to me. I bolted for the stairs as I heard the car getting even closer. Just as I was turning to run up them, I looked back for a second and saw 2 men jumping out of the van. I don't even know where the strength came from, but I began jumping up those stairs multiple at a time, like some kind of Olympic athlete. I could hear the tapping noise the steps made when someone was climbing them behind me. When I got to the top of the steps, I ran into my neighbor, who was going to pick up her kids from the elementary school. She asked me what happened and why I was so terrified. I turned around behind me to see if I could spot those 2 guys, but they were already long gone. I just barely caught a glimpse of the van speeding down the street and turning the corner. I told her everything that happened, and she helped escort me home after. When I arrived, I told my mom, and she called the police right away. They came over and I told them everything, but I never heard back from them about what happened. So maybe 4 years ago, I was kind of into going to this church, and the pastor was a younger guy like myself. We really connected and spent a good amount of time together. One Wednesday night we were finishing up. There was a woman we didn't really know who had only showed up to church the first time that night. The pastor Dave was talking to her and being the personable guy he always is. This woman, not to judge by looks, but she probably was a meth user, just by looking at her teeth and the condition of her skin. I'm going through and locking the back doors when Dave comes over and asks me to ride with him. This woman apparently needed a ride home, and he wanted a witness so that she couldn't accuse him of something later. A smart move, since the woman seemed to be acting a little bit suspiciously. I was a bit hesitant at first, but I soon agreed. As we were walking down the front steps of the church, she walked past a wooden cross in the yard and ran her hand over it. She told us she found the scene of Jesus on the cross very sexual, and that his torture aroused her. That was weird enough, but it got even better. As we're driving her out into the middle of nowhere where she lives, it turned out to be a trailer in the middle of the woods. She kept on talking about how she could feel the devil, and she knew the devil was much stronger than God. I honestly felt this really horrible sense of unease. I had the distinct feeling that I was about to experience an exorcist scene in this Corolla or something. We dropped her off at her home and drove off pretty soon after. She never came back to the church again, and to this day I still haven't had a weirder or scarier moment than that night. One night, when I was driving back from a friend's house, I noticed I was being followed by a creepy biker dude. He'd followed me for almost 10 miles already. It would have been different if this was the highway or something, but I also cut off from there and went through multiple residential areas where he followed me too. Eventually, I had to lead him right past a cop and get the cop to stop us both. Apparently, the biker guy was really high, and he was paranoid as well. He thought I was someone else, so he wanted to corner me and take me out. Luckily though, I grew up in a small town, so I knew most of the cops personally, and I also knew the areas where they liked to patrol. I don't know what would have happened to me that night if I didn't get that cop to stop us. My first girlfriend was way back in early high school. I broke up with her, and I broke her heart too. A few years later though, some guy started impersonating me. Messaging her, buying her things, leaving her all sorts of gifts at her doorstep. She thought it was me, and she was extremely pissed off I was messing with her heart. Somehow, the guy had managed to get into her Facebook. This was shortly after Facebook became widely available, and did a deep dive, learning everything he possibly could about me through all my messages to her. Apparently, he was so convincing she was positive it was really me. At some point, the guy started following me too. By this point, she wanted to kill me, thinking I was messing with her way too much. I started proving where I was, and eventually she did get the guy to confess. It was so bizarre. At first, I wanted nothing to do with her. I just kept telling her to piss off because I thought she was messing with me to get some revenge for me breaking up with her. The strangest moment of all was when he had followed me while I was smoking at a nearby lake. I was alone, and it was about 4 a.m. in the morning. I only found out about him because she texted me to notify me, and I happened to turn and see him there. We did manage to get the guy to stop, but I really don't know what that was all about in the end. There's a skating rink by my house across the street from a fairly large cemetery. The cemetery is accessible by a large steel gate that's locked after dark. Its perimeter is blocked off by a 4-foot-high cement wall. When I was 12, my friends and I had our parents drop us off to go skating. We would sneak out sometimes and walk around the neighborhood like dumbasses though. This particular night, we were daring each other to jump over the wall and dance on a grave. We heard an urban legend that if you did so, a skeleton would reach out and grab you. Eventually, all 6 of us girls were dancing around when we saw a woman coming towards us. She was wearing a nightgown, and she was coming from deep within the cemetery. She appeared to be pushing a shopping cart. This cemetery is right on a busy 4-lane road. We leapt out and ran across the street back to the skating rink. It probably took us about 20 to 30 seconds max. Somehow though, when we turned around, this woman was still walking towards us cart in hand, but now on the other side of the wall. We were about a block away from the steel gate. The only possible way she could have crossed that fast and been on the same side was if she had somehow lifted her cart over the walls in that 20 to 30 seconds. She then followed us inside. There was a teens hockey league in the middle of playing, and some of their parents chased her into a phone booth while screaming at her for trying to scare a bunch of little girls. She got into the fetal position and started screeching. We ran out and waited around the corner for my mom. Mom picked us up a few minutes later, and while she drove away, I again saw the woman pushing her cart down the street by the cemetery towards us. 15 years later, I can only imagine she had deep psychological issues.